The studio lights burned bright, crisp, and merciless, as if they too demanded truth. The cameras were rolling, the intro music had faded, and across from Piers Morgan sat a man once hailed as the voice of a generation. Now, Kanye West sat, stiffly in his chair, eyes half-lidded, jaw clenched, wrapped in a black hoodie that draped like a cloak, part armor, part defiance. Piers leaned forward, his tone clipped but calm. "Let's begin plainly, Kanye. Do you regret what you said about the Jewish community?" Kanye didn't blink. "No, I regret nothing." The tension thickened. In the control room, a producer glanced nervously at the live feed. A legal advisor stood by. Everyone knew this wasn't a regular interview. It was a powder keg with a ticking fuse. "I'm exposing the real enemy," Kanye continued, voice rising. "I'm speaking truth, that's why they hate me." Piers held his composure, but his eyes narrowed. "You've made sweeping, dangerous claims, Kanye. This isn't about truth. It's about responsibility." Kanye scoffed. "Responsibility? Where was responsibility when I was exploited, commodified, chewed up, and spit out? Now I speak, and suddenly everyone's got a conscience?" His words were quicksand, erratic, passionate, disturbing. He ranted about control, power, hidden hands behind the media. He spoke of betrayal, of genius unrecognized, of enemies in shadows. Behind the camera, the air was electric with dread. "You sound like you're spiraling," Piers said slowly. "And I don't say that to insult you. I say that because I'm concerned." Kanye's stare hardened. "Don't patronize me. I'm not crazy. I'm awake." Then came the moment. 4 words, sharp as a blade. "Turn it off, Piers." Silence stretched. The host raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" I said, "Turn it off." Kanye's voice cracked with fury. "If you can't handle the truth, end it." Piers glanced toward the booth, his jaw set. He hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. A producer reached across the console. The red live indicator flickered out. The feed died mid-sentence. In that split second, the carefully built illusion shattered. The interview wasn't an exchange. It was an implosion. The man across the table hadn't come to be challenged. He'd come to erupt, and erupt he did. No outro, no apologies, just silence. The audience watching at home had no idea what they'd just witnessed, only that it felt like the moment a cultural icon publicly unraveled. Later, networks would clip it into viral chunks. Analysts would dissect the rage, the paranoia, the pain behind the eyes. Some would say he needed help. Others would say he needed consequences. But in that moment, inside that sterile studio, it was just 2 men, one trying to conduct an interview, the other daring the world to try and silence him. And now, the trial was beginning. Not in a courtroom, but across every screen, every platform, every corner of a divided world. The morning after the interview cut to black, the world woke to headlines, laced with fire. Kanye Meltdown interview cut mid-broadcast. Piers Morgan pulls plug on Ye Live. Free speech or hate speech, the line blurs. Clips leaked across Twitter within hours. Kanye's cold stare, the tension in Piers' throat, the 4 words that detonated everything. "Turn it off. Piers." Within Talk TV's offices, the mood was far from triumphant. There were no champagne toasts, no quiet nods of journalistic pride, just the shrill hum of PR phones and legal counsel whispering behind shut doors. Piers Morgan sat at the center of the storm, unusually silent. His desk was flooded with drafts of statements, some apologetic, others defiant. He read none of them. A senior producer paced behind him. "We can't sit on this. Everyone's got half the story. We need to release our version, or lose control of the narrative." Piers didn't turn around. "Our version?" he scoffed. "As if this can be cleaned up in post?" He'd interviewed world leaders, despots, disgraced moguls. But this was something else. Not because of who Kanye was, but because of what he represented. Chaos wrapped in celebrity, genius poisoned by grievance, and most dangerously, a man with nothing left to lose. Outside the building, protesters had already gathered. Some carried signs reading "Cancel the Cancellers." Others shouted for accountability. No one agreed on what had happened, only that it mattered. Inside, the editing bay, technicians handled the raw footage like unstable TNT. A junior editor hesitated over the keyboard. Should we soften it? Blur the rougher parts? The executive producer replied flatly, if we soften it, we become part of it. Piers finally emerged from his office and watched the uncut interview on a monitor. Kanye's words still rang with raw defiance. Every frame felt radioactive. You couldn't touch it without consequence. He exhaled slowly. We invited him here. We wanted raw, unfiltered, uncensored. And now we have to own it. A PR advisor stepped forward. So, we release it? Not yet, Piers replied. Let the storm gather first, then we show the eye. There was calculation in his voice, but also something else, a flicker of regret. Because deep down, Piers knew they hadn't simply documented a moment. They'd triggered it. They'd handed Kanye the microphone, knowing full well what he might say. And while Piers had built a career challenging guests, holding their feet to the fire, something about this felt different. Not because he couldn't handle Kanye, but because maybe no one could. In trying to confront the uncancelable, he may have given him his loudest echo yet. And now, as the headlines multiplied and the lawsuits whispered into formation, Morgan faced his own reckoning. Had he exposed the truth? Or had he become complicit in broadcasting a man's descent for clicks, outrage, and spectacle? The answer was already spreading, not in court filings or press releases, but in the court of public opinion, which had just called its first witness. Next, the world weighs in. Is this free speech or dangerous provocation? The interview hadn't just been shut off, it had been ignited. By noon, social media was a battlefield. Trending hashtags clawed at each other like warring ideologies. Ye was right. Deplatform hate. Cancel culture. Kills art. Never again. Clips played on repeat. Kanye's clipped syllables, his eyes hollow and burning, and Piers's thinly veiled restraint. News. Anchors debated it like it was war footage. Legal analysts parsed every sentence. And in the corners of the internet where conspiracies bred, Kanye was hailed as a prophet. But for many watching, especially Jewish communities, the pain wasn't theoretical. It was real, palpable, familiar. At a press conference in Manhattan, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League stepped forward, voice resolute. This isn't about censorship. This is about safety. When a man with tens of millions of followers says the things Mr. West said, even hinted at, it doesn't disappear. When the camera turns off, it spreads. The response was swift. Jewish advocacy organizations flooded the airwaves. Podcasts released hour-long dissections. Community leaders issued public statements not just condemning Kanye, but demanding action from every platform that allowed him to speak. But Kanye's supporters fired back with ferocity. This is what happens when a black man speaks truth about systems of control, one influencer argued on Instagram Live. The same people screaming free speech all year suddenly want to shut it down the second they feel uncomfortable. Another louder voice. Kanye's not crazy. He's free. And that's why they hate him. The lines were drawn, but the battle wasn't new. It was the same battlefield that had consumed comedians, politicians, and tech billionaires. Only now, it was centered on a man too rich to be ignored, too unstable to be controlled. A legal scholar on the BBC offered a cold analysis. Free speech in most Western democracies is not absolute. Private companies, like television networks, like social media platforms, can limit it. The question isn't whether they can silence Kanye, it's whether they should. In the midst of the chaos, Kanye remained unrepentant. On a live stream later that night, disheveled streaming from the backseat of a moving car, he doubled down. They're afraid of me, because I'm not on payroll. I've got my own mind, and they can't control that. Then came a half smile, barely formed. I'll keep talking. I don't care who cancels me. Piers Morgan, meanwhile, tried to thread a needle between principle and pragmatism. On his next show, he addressed the backlash head-on. I believe in giving people a platform to explain themselves, even when I disagree violently with what they say. But Kanye didn't come to explain. He came to ignite. And we have a responsibility to stop the fire when it starts to burn out of control. But critics weren't buying it. They accused Morgan of baiting the collapse, of knowing full well that a man teetering on the edge might fall, especially if you shoved a camera in his face. You don't get to light the match and then blame the flame, read one viral tweet with over 4 million views. The question now wasn't just about Kanye's beliefs. It was about the responsibility of platforms, of institutions, of gatekeepers, to filter the line between discomfort and danger. And suddenly, every media outlet, podcast, and platform that had ever hosted Kanye West was forced to ask itself a haunting question: did we give him space to speak or space to harm? As the fallout intensified, that question would no longer be theoretical, because the walls were starting to crack, not just around Kanye's image, but around the inner circle that once protected him. Behind the public firestorm, another storm was brewing, quieter, insidious, and devastating. Kanye West's empire was crumbling, not in headlines, but in boardrooms and private messages. Adidas had already severed ties. Balenciaga issued statements distancing themselves from his behavior. His talent managers, once protective and fiercely loyal, quietly resigned. The man who had once walked into rooms with unstoppable gravitas now found doors closing, one by one. An anonymous former friend described the scene in stark terms. We tried, but he doesn't listen to anyone, not even himself. The people closest to him could only watch. The words weren't meant to provoke scandal. They were meant to convey helplessness. Every attempt at intervention, every call, every private meeting, every carefully worded note had failed. Kanye, the visionary, the disruptor, the genius, was now untethered, drifting into self-destruction. At the same time, public opinion made its subtle judgment. Those who had once celebrated his boldness now recoiled from the danger he represented. Investors, sponsors, collaborators, all calculated risk versus reward. And when the risk outweighed the reward, the choices were swift and decisive. Even within his family, unease rippled. Kim Kardashian released a cryptic statement, carefully phrased to avoid inflaming tensions. Yet the subtext was clear. Boundaries had been crossed, and consequences were inevitable. Meanwhile, fans were divided. Some doubled down, claiming Kanye was misunderstood, vilified for speaking uncomfortable truths. Others turned away in disappointment and disgust, unable to reconcile the genius with the chaos. Social media mirrored this fracture, a digital echo of the wider culture war, some calling for compassion, others for accountability. Inside Kanye's creative circle, fear and frustration competed. Collaborators whispered about unprofessional behavior, missed deadlines, and erratic communication. The protective buffer of loyalty, once ironclad, was now paper-thin. And perhaps most damning was the silence. Those who had profited from his genius, producers, executives, industry friends, were conspicuously absent. The networks, labels, and studios that had once elevated him now watched from the sidelines, unwilling to risk association with a figure rapidly shifting from icon to liability. Kanye's isolation became palpable. Publicly, he raged, claiming persecution and misunderstanding. Privately, the walls were closing in. The very institutions that once amplified his voice were now the instruments of his quiet exile. By the time the media storm reached its peak, the truth was undeniable. The collapse wasn't sudden. It had been a slow, grinding fracture, visible only to those who stood closest. And now, as sponsors withdrew, collaborators vanished, and public opinion shifted, Kanye West found himself alone. A king without a court, a genius without a stage, a man untouchable by fame but vulnerable to reality. The stage was set for the next confrontation. The world would now debate whether brilliance could excuse recklessness, whether fame could shield a man from accountability, and whether Kanye West could survive the very empire he had built. Next, the world grapples with the line between artistic genius and moral responsibility. Irony had a sharp edge. While Kanye West was facing the world's wrath, Piers Morgan found himself unexpectedly in the crossfire. For years, he had built a reputation as the fearless interviewer, the man who pressed politicians, celebrities, and controversial figures without flinching. But now even his composure was being questioned. Critics argued that Morgan had played a dangerous game. He knew what he was doing, wrote one columnist. He invited a volatile, unstable man onto a live platform, knowing full well the consequences. And then he pressed him until he exploded. Social media became a trial of its own. Clips of Morgan leaning forward, nodding, sometimes smiling nervously as Kanye's tirade unfolded, circulated endlessly. Memes and reaction videos mocked him. Headlines demanded accountability. Did Piers Morgan bait Kanye? Morgan's ethics on trial. Who's really in control, Morgan or Kanye? In the newsroom, emails stacked up like legal briefs. Viewers demanded explanations, advertisers questioned their association, and colleagues whispered about whether Morgan had miscalculated. Morgan himself remained measured, but behind the camera the tension was palpable. One senior producer remarked, "You can't undo what's already aired. Every choice we made is now under a microscope." Even his own network debated the decision. Was Morgan a journalist holding someone accountable, or a provocateur orchestrating a spectacle? The answer was neither simple nor unanimous. During a press segment, Morgan addressed the criticism directly. "I invited Kanye to speak because the public deserves to see him unfiltered. But the responsibility of a host is not just to ask questions, it's to know when a conversation becomes dangerous." That's exactly what happened. Yet the backlash didn't abate. Critics accused him of hypocrisy, pointing out moments in the footage where he chuckled or nodded as Kanye's rhetoric intensified. He wasn't moderating, he was amplifying, one op-ed argued. Morgan understood the paradox he now faced. He had to defend free speech, maintain credibility, and protect his network, all while navigating the unpredictable behavior of a man whose own fame and chaos had become inseparable. As the day progressed, consultants, lawyers, and PR teams debated every clip, every frame. The internal consensus: Piers had handled it as best as possible under the circumstances, yet the court of public opinion refused to absolve him. Outside the studio, commentators and celebrities weighed in. Some supported him, praising his restraint. Others condemned him, insisting that he had exploited Kanye's mental state for ratings. Morgan's challenge was clear: survive the fallout without compromising the integrity he had built over decades, while recognizing that in the modern media landscape, even a seasoned journalist could become collateral damage in a celebrity meltdown. And so, while Kanye faced exile, Piers faced scrutiny. A reminder that in a world of viral spectacle, even those behind the microphone can be judged as harshly as those in front of it. As the media frenzy swirled, the legal machinery quietly began to stir. Lawyers, once in the shadows of celebrity spectacle, now emerged as key players in the unfolding drama. The moment Kanye West's tirade went viral, threats of lawsuits and legal scrutiny became inevitable. Kanye's own team warned networks about defamation claims. Anything aired, even partially edited, could be grounds for litigation, one attorney explained. The words were measured, but the implications were electric. Legal counsel at Talk TV and other platforms reviewed contracts, dissecting clauses about guest conduct, editorial discretion, and liability for incendiary speech. Every word Kanye had uttered was suddenly potential evidence. Every hesitation or pause on camera, a point of contention. Meanwhile, advocacy groups considered legal options. Jewish organizations debated whether Kanye's comments could constitute actionable hate speech under UK and US statutes. Public statements and tweets were being archived as exhibits. Analysts and commentators dissected precedent cases. Where did free speech end and incitement begin? In Manhattan, a legal scholar spoke on air. Media companies are generally protected when moderating content. But there's a fine line between enforcing standards and suppressing speech. Here, networks had to decide, do we allow the rant to continue, Or do we intervene? Both options carry potential liability. Inside Kanye's circle, the tension was palpable. Advisors feared that any legal misstep could exacerbate an already volatile situation. The stakes were higher than public opinion. Contracts with sponsors, record labels, and fashion brands hung in the balance. One misstatement could trigger financial penalties or even nullify agreements. Even Piers Morgan's legal team was working overtime. "We had to prove editorial responsibility," a network lawyer later explained. The decision to cut the interview was not just ethical, it was legally prudent. Yet the questions persisted. Could a network ever truly be free from liability when broadcasting a celebrity meltdown? Were platforms responsible for the content of a guest whose actions they could not fully control? And in a world where clips are dissected across billions of devices, could any intervention truly protect against consequences? The legal storm was invisible to the casual viewer, but no less real. Contracts were being dissected, clauses interpreted, risk assessed. Every viral clip, every social media post, every email sent from a corporate counsel's inbox became a chess piece in a game with no end. Kanye's meltdown had transcended the studio. It was no longer a moment of celebrity chaos. It was a matter of law, liability, and precedent. And as the legal tentacles spread, it became clear that this was just the beginning. The storm surrounding Kanye West was no longer just legal or financial. It had become profoundly human. Analysts, journalists, and fans alike grappled with a haunting question. Was this the unraveling of a moral compass, or the visible fracture of a fragile mind? Psychologists weighed in on television panels, speaking in measured tones about mania, bipolar disorder, and the pressures of fame. "We cannot ignore the role mental health plays," one clinical expert explained. "Extreme behavior in public figures is often symptomatic, not merely performative." Yet for many observers, mental illness did not absolve responsibility. Public figures wield power, another commentator argued. They influence millions. Genius does not grant immunity from accountability. The tension between empathy and outrage became a cultural tug-of-war. Even Kanye's friends and family struggled to navigate the blurred lines. One former collaborator remarked privately, "He isn't malicious all the time, but when he is, the consequences are catastrophic. You can see the pain in his eyes, but you also see stubbornness that won't bend to reason." Social media reflected the divide. Some users pleaded for compassion, citing his history of mental health struggles. Others condemned him for hate speech and recklessness, unwilling to separate his condition from his public actions. Each viral clip became a case study, a man oscillating between brilliance, fury, and vulnerability. Kanye himself refused to clarify or apologize. In interviews and live streams, he doubled down on his statements, often framed as truths the world refused to hear. "I don't care if you call me crazy," he declared. "I'm speaking reality. They just can't handle it." Piers Morgan, meanwhile, faced his own moral reckoning. He had witnessed a man unravel in real time. Could he have intervened more gently? Should he have anticipated the fragility beneath Kanye's bravado? Every critique against Kanye's behavior echoed back at him, questioning not just the guest but the host, the network, and the culture that amplified it. This chapter of the story forced a larger reflection. How does society balance compassion with accountability? How do we hold public figures responsible when their genius is inseparable from their volatility? Where does moral judgment end and human empathy begin? For Kanye, the answers offered little solace. The world watched, judged, and debated, but no one could rewrite the moments that had already been broadcast. And as the lines blurred between illness and intent, the question remained: could a man so untethered ever reclaim his empire, or had he already crossed a point of no return? In the glittering corridors of Hollywood, silence often speaks louder than applause. As Kanye West's on-air meltdown ricocheted across screens worldwide, the entertainment industry watched, calculated, and waited. Agents whispered in private offices. Studio executives held closed-door meetings. Directors and producers avoided public commentary, weighing alliances, endorsements, and potential backlash. Every tweet, every comment, every association with Kanye became a liability. The same man, who had shaped music, fashion, and celebrity culture, now existed as a professional hazard. Some insiders admitted privately, "We can admire his creativity, we can respect his genius, but the moment he threatens brands, collaborators, or the public, admiration turns into caution." The pattern was clear. Fashion houses quietly cut ties. Streaming platforms reevaluated projects. Awards committees reconsidered nominations. Hollywood, which had once celebrated audacious risk-takers, now signaled that certain lines, when crossed in public, unmoderated and viral, could not be ignored. Celebrities, too, spoke in coded phrases, carefully, crafting statements to acknowledge concern without overt condemnation. Social media accounts posted cryptic notes about holding people accountable and supporting mental health awareness, avoiding direct confrontation while signaling alignment with public sentiment. Even the friends and collaborators closest to Kanye adopted this silent strategy. Calls went unanswered. Invitations declined. Offices once open to brainstorming, creation, and collaboration now closed quietly behind polished doors. Publicly, the silence was notable. Privately, it was deafening. Hollywood's unspoken verdict was clear. Kanye West, for all his influence and genius, had become a liability too great to endorse. Talent, brilliance, and vision no longer outweighed the cultural and financial risk he carried. In this quiet, calculated judgment, there was no spectacle, no dramatic exit. Only the slow erosion of opportunity, influence, and trust. The message was unambiguous. The industry would admire from a distance, but no longer from the front lines. Kanye's empire, once vibrant and expansive, now faced the consequences of public unraveling, not from a court of law, but from an industry that measured value in both brilliance and stability. And as Hollywood's verdict echoed silently through contracts, boardrooms, and social media, it became painfully clear. Talent alone could not shield him from the fallout of his own words.